This is the Benefits Buzz Podcast, your weekly pulse on what's happening in the world of employee benefits. Brought to you by your friends at WEX, who believe in simplifying benefits for everyone. Now listen up and let's get buzzed. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Benefits Buzz. I'm doing pretty good. It's springtime, Kelsey. We're pretty far into our season now. I feel like we found our groove, and every episode we do, I learn something new. I love that we are doing these. I'm super selfish because I know we're doing this for our listeners, but I learn in every single one of these podcast episodes, and I love it.
I totally agree. Could not agree more. It's such a great opportunity to meet people too, and just see other people's viewpoints, what they do, what they're passionate about. But I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit nervous about today.
Oh, well, if you're nervous, then I'm going to get nervous. Let's not be nervous.
Well, the only reason I'm nervous is because I know we're talking about like millennials and, Gen Xers. And as a millennial, I feel like we get a bad rap.
Oh, so we already have some stereotypes. We feel like I love this. Well, I'm a Gen Xer myself, so I'm old school. So it's fun to dive into this and understand what next gen leadership means. It's a fun topic. So I want to, with that said, let's just jump into this episode. We have a fantastic guest, someone that I've had the pleasure of working with and connecting with, and I'm so happy to bring her on the show. Her name is Bethany Berkeley. She's the CEO and co-owner of Dale Carnegie Training, North Dakota and Minnesota. Bethany, welcome to the show.
Thank you and good morning. I am excited to be here connecting with another high energy group of people talking about people, right? So it's a good day.
It is a great day. And I love this topic. And I love that Kelsey's already nervous about this topic. It's like, we might offend a generation. We might not. We'll see. I think
we'll see. Well, I am a millennial too. So I'm right there with you, Kelsey.
Heck yeah. That means it's going to be a good conversation about millennials today, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be fun. And I think, the angle that we're taking, there's so many, when we talk about a generation, there's so many different ways we can probably take that conversation. And it's usually a blast to talk about. But I think in our episode today, we wanted to talk about like this whole concept of like next gen leadership and succession planning. And we need to understand that we have a huge generation that is starting to take over the workplace. And there's been tons of talk and tons of study on what is this generation like? What do they love? How do they want to work? What do we do? And I think that's all great to understand, but I think it's a really important piece to understand is how do we help this generation grow and learn and become the next generation of leadership and management? Because they're at the age now where they're hitting those roles within companies, right? They're not the newbies anymore, right? They're not the new fish, right? They're the ones that are starting to take these really important roles. And so how do we make sure they're prepared? And what can companies do to do that? So I'm so pumped to talk about that. There's tons of stats. I want to talk, our producer, he does such a good job of like doing research on Kelsey and I's behalf. And I want to like literally read some really important stats to get our conversation going, okay? 92% of respondents felt it was risky not to have a succession plan. Yet, only 25% of companies felt they have identified adequate successor candidates for those positions, and less than half have a formal process for developing such candidates. So what I'm reading through those big numbers is like, we know this is coming, but no one's doing zilch about it.
I feel like it always works out that way, right? Like there's always this stat where people are really concerned about something and then very few are actually like acting on it. Right. But I think a good place maybe to start is just what is succession planning?
Yes, and that is so true. Even in our global research at Dale Carnegie and Associates, we see there are these immense pressing issues and very little people doing anything about it. And so there's clearly a challenge or a gap there in how do you implement and execute on creating a plan, especially something that can be intimidating like succession planning. The traditional view and definition of succession planning is pretty straightforward, and that's that it's a process for identifying and developing new leaders who can replace old leaders when they say leave, retire, or die. And the thing is that most people start looking at succession planning based on my experience and our research when they know that people are going to be retiring. And that's usually way too late in the game. And we look at succession planning a little bit differently at Dale Carnegie, which is it's really part of the talent development cycle. And from the very beginning of your strategy and development, when you think of recruiting in your business, that's when succession planning should begin, because we don't just build a business, right? We're building people, and those people are building the business.
That's great. And I realized I did a really nervous laugh when you said people die, and I didn't mean to be insensitive, but you just think about all the different ways that like you have to, all the unexpected things that happen in a business, right? And like you said, it's all about being prepared. And I think what we're hearing is like people know this is coming, but until they feel the pain, this is just what people do. It's human nature, right? Yeah, I know I should probably brush my teeth and floss, but then until like you get, the dentist says you've got a cavity, like, yeah, I should have flossed. Okay, I'll start flossing. Right? That's the same thing. Like we know this is coming. So, we're going to hope that our listeners are going to take some action. So maybe like what difference does it make in a business if you are smart about planning? Like what have you seen for those companies that have taken action and started thinking about succession planning? What have been some of the benefits of that from what you've seen?
Yeah, so we can talk about those benefits in two different ways. There's the purely business benefits, and then we have the workforce development, and they're very much connected. From the workforce development side, the people who are driving the business's success, when people are, and leaders are intentional about succession planning, they're strategic about it, it's incorporated in their retention and recruitment strategies, we see that people are happier, they're more engaged, they're going to stay longer because they're given opportunities to learn in a more dynamic way, in a more intentional way, to ensure that everybody is confident and capable regardless of shifts that could take place. And on the business end of it, when people are strategic, leaders are being really thoughtful, there's going to be less disruption to cash flow and revenue. There's going to be less major cultural shifts that could bring those workplace silos, less turnover, right? Which is great because that's very expensive when we have to deal with constant turnover. That toxic work environment that can occur when cultural shifts are taking place, causing fear and uncertainty, is reduced. And again, people are just going to start feeling more committed and engaged. They're going to work harder and be more productive.
That is so true. I just think about my own experience too. And when I feel very like challenged and like I'm given opportunities to be challenged and try something new and experience something different, it like gives me that drive to just keep going and, work harder and really just dive into it. So I don't know. I want to go back a little bit to something I said earlier. Maybe that's the millennial in me. I know we sometimes get a bad rap, us millennials, for wanting instant gratification, but I would also argue that maybe we're out there trying new things, doing things differently, staying curious. So I'm just curious, there's a lot said about Gen X versus millennial versus baby boomers. Like, what is your opinion on how these different generations are positioned in our world?
So my personal opinion is actually to throw all of those stereotypes and generalizations out the door completely, to see everybody as their own self, right? What are their talents and capabilities? Because we know that those generalizations can be helpful just to have a glance, right? At a view, how might our popular culture and differences and world events change a particular generation, their thought process and behaviors. But at the heart of any individual is their experiences in life and how they were raised, the different people that were around them, their previous experiences in their career and personally. And we have to look beyond those generalizations because those can hurt us too, right? When we think about recruiting and we think of the different age ranges that we have available to us, we may have a narrow view that could reduce innovation and our opportunities to step back from stereotype and really propel forward.
I love it. You've eased my nerves already.
Good.
Absolutely. I love the idea too, right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, I love that your philosophy is looking at the individual, because there's so many things that shape their behavior, the way in which they like to work and their skill sets, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe with that aside, right, the next game plan has to be is, okay, I bought in, Bethany. I'm going to finally bite the bullet and I'm going to start planning for this. I'm going to start shaping and grooming what I think are going to be my future leaders. And whether they're Gen Xers or Gen Yers or heck, Gen Y, Gen Z is now entering the workplace too. So, I mean, at the end of the day, what's the advice you would give, right? How do we start to prepare? Is it just the same old learning plan, and what kind of management? What's the most important skill set? So maybe I'll hit you with a two-pronged question. The first is keeping generations alive. One more time, have you found that these trainings and planning for succession, does some of the traditional things we used to do to try and prepare people for leadership, has that changed? Does this generation like to absorb and learn any differently? And two, what would you suggest are some of the things to start that succession planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at, how do you start this process, and I'll just answer both of those questions. Let me know if I don't answer both of them fully, and we can circle back. So I always encourage leaders and businesses to take a look at the why first. Why is this important? What is our end goal? And really two key areas. Again, we have the workforce, we have culture. How are people going to feel when they show up every single day? What can we control and what can't we, right? And then we have the ultimate business outcome. Why is this valuable for the value of the business, to ensure that the business is healthy long-term? Because at the end of the day, every business has a purpose, right? To bring in profits so that people have a high quality of life. That's why we all find careers in the first place. So we need to look at both of those areas. And when we do that, when we examine the why, we first need to look at ourselves as leaders and say, okay, what are my emotions when I think of succession planning? Because our research shows us that oftentimes a barrier can be leaders being concerned about preserving the legacy as it was built, or they built it, their own fear of mortality, or even ego, and thinking, this is what's worked, I know best, right? And we can all fall short in those capacities. Even me at Dale Carnegie have to practice Dale Carnegie all the time, because we're all human. When we go past that layer of taking a look at ourselves, then we have to see, do we have time to execute this in a way that allows us to put in a solid strategy with the resources we have, with what we can control right now? Because it's one thing to take a day, create a big plan, and then what happens? It's not executed, right? Because you just didn't create that sustainability action plan. Or any company can go through any training process and have a great idea and lay it out, but then no one's bought in. So how can you take a step back and look at the communication plan? How are you going to incorporate this into every element of the business's culture and touch points to make sure that it is comprehensive, but also broken down in pieces that are manageable for not only the leadership to continue to be involved, because that's really important for buy-in, but everyone else that's creating that culture and bringing that process to life on a daily basis.
So what's the first step? I'm an employer, I'm ready to go, I'm bought in, succession planning, I'm going to get all of my leaders in a room. What is the very first thing? When we're creating the strategy, you said that we want to make sure that we're breaking it down into actionable pieces so we can sustain it. What is the very first thing that they should be doing?
The very first thing that I would recommend is looking at the risk of not doing it. What happens if we don't have someone to replace the roles of everyone in this room tomorrow? Because things can happen, right? Even if we all want to assume that we're going to live full and happy lives, but things can happen at any moment that bring us to a different place where we can't perform in the same way or as regularly as we may have anticipated, right? So when we take a step back and we look at succession planning more holistically, and we realize, oh, this isn't just about people retiring. This could be about, Bethany could get hit by a bus tomorrow. What would be the state of the business if that happened? And that can bring to life all of the risks and everybody getting on the same page about where those gaps are. After evaluating those risks and understanding where the holes could be and how the business could really be in pain, and the workforce and the culture, I believe the next step is, who would be the next person who could take over in my role should I get hit by a bus tomorrow? And hopefully I don't. I feel like I keep saying that, which is terrible, but let's just say, right? So who would be?
It's important to talk about, though.
It is important because life happens, right? And the past couple of years have shown us that in so many different ways. But then who are the people on my team that I feel I could start to groom right away? And then you start to work down that process and think, okay, if it's this person, who's the person beneath them that would be ready to be groomed and capable? And even further, how can we start to hire with intention and build this into our recruitment strategy? So it's really, looking at every single level of the process with a lot of strategy, and not just looking at the hard skills component, because that's important, right? How do we make sure that what sets us apart in the marketplace from a hard skill, tactical skill perspective is preserved? What types of talents are we looking for? The other big piece of it is the other main differentiator in the marketplace, which is people. How do we ensure that the culture is healthy, evolving, and that we're innovating? And how can we get in our own way? So long story short, it is a complex process that doesn't need to be as complicated as we make it. And it's complex because it should be, because we're going to put in the time and the strategy to make sure that it's comprehensive, right? So taking the time to have the conversation and knowing that it's not just going to be a 2-hour meeting, right, with your leaders. There's going to need to be an ongoing conversation, asking questions and looking at ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's really important. There's a couple of big things that you pulled out there, right? Is understanding what happens if we didn't. So understanding the realization, looking down and finding the right individuals. And I think that's maybe where I'd like to think about as well, right? Like, are leaders made? Are the leaders born? How do you train leaders? How do you identify natural leaders? One of the biggest pitfalls that I typically see is sometimes in companies, the people that find themselves in what I would call traditional leadership roles sometimes are those that have just been there the longest, or maybe they're really good at that particular skill or job, but they might not be the individual who should be leading. And I think it's just a common pitfall that I've seen in a million companies, right? They spent the time, they deserve this position to manage this team and be a lead, right? Now, what do you see? Again, I like to do multiple pronged questions because I'm complicated like that. One is, what should you be looking for in a leader, right? When you're choosing an individual, and then make it real for us, Bethany. Like, what kind of curriculum do I give them to help, like, bring more out of them so they can handle the responsibility of these positions?
Yeah, well, you are so right. We see this all the time. We have conversations with a lot of different businesses across industries, and often there is that pitfall of, let's say it's a rock star salesperson who's going to get promoted to be a sales manager because they're great at bringing in revenue, but then all of a sudden your revenue pitfalls because that salesperson doesn't know how to lead people. And you can be good with people in a sales capacity and not know how to manage and lead a team and inspire and motivate them to drive, which requires that we let go of some of our responsibilities, right? We delegate, we see the talents and strengths in other people, and that we're open-minded to what that journey might look like. Really, the curriculum, of course, what I want to say is send them to the Dale Carnegie.
Of course, sure.
Because we have developed curriculum around this very concept. But in summary, it's how can we develop someone's leadership potential by looking ahead and knowing that there's someone that is an emerging leader, and really looking at our entire workforce and giving them that opportunity from the very beginning. And what can we do as leaders to show them a glimpse into our worlds? What is it like to really mentor in a capacity that's a part of culture? It doesn't even need to be a super formal process, but from the beginning, what are the aspects of my role where I can share knowledge, experience, expertise, and how can we ensure that other people understand that winning the hearts and minds of others is what's going to drive performance? And again, what are our own blind spots, and how can we bring out the best in other people? So there's a lot of different process and curriculum that can be involved in that. And that should all be in alignment with the business's culture and values and really where they want to go in the future and innovate, because it's not just here's where we are right now, but we have to take a step back and look at where could our marketplace go? What would we be missing? And what happens if we stick with the status quo?
I love that. Winning the hearts and minds of others drives people. I love that.
I can't take credit for it because that's just what the definition of influence is. So I shouldn't.
Well, that's really good. But, I just keep thinking while you're talking, when you're talking about, creating the next group of leaders. And, when Eric's asking, well, how do you groom them? What exactly do you do with them? I think one of the hardest things for any individual is creating goals related to things like leadership development. And how do you identify, even as an individual or as a manager, what are some things that you can assess people on, evaluate them on when it comes to leadership.
Mm-hmm. Well, so much of that too is going to be contingent on the business and the industry and their internal strategy for what a leader needs to be for that business and where they want to go in the future, because we can overcategorize people as well, right? Just like we can overgeneralize different generations and age groups. We can say, well, a leader is X. And we know that a leader, again, should be someone of influence that is actively winning the hearts and minds of others, that has the expertise to do that, the self-awareness, the emotional intelligence, and can create a psychologically safe space to bring out the best in people. And that are, truly, people need to be willing to contribute their talent and add value, which means we have to ensure that that space is available to hear from them, and that we need to be open-minded, looking at our workforce and identifying opportunities to grow them. So it also means focusing more on positive attributes rather than all of the challenges, because it's human nature to gravitate towards negative things or to get into that feedback fallacy of constantly correcting, when if we're going to truly innovate, we need to look things, to turn things over, right? And just be positively focused and have positive intent. I don't know that I just answered your question, but what are some ways, I believe you asked, that you can measure if someone is ready to be a leader? Is that correct? I was kind of...
Yep, you got it.
Okay. What other follow-up? Could I provide more clarity? I don't think that I articulated that very well.
No, I think it's good. I think what we're at is we're thinking about conceptually trying to define what leadership looks like. What could we do to make sure we're growing? These are all things I'm thinking, HR pros are trying to figure out, right? I want to foster my employees. I want to feel like this is a place they can learn and grow. We have to, and selfishly, I have to have a game plan of how do I make sure I've got the right next line of leaders waiting in the queues, right? So maybe let's make it super, super tangible, right? Like, okay, I know what I need to do. Are we talking about am I making a spreadsheet, Bethany? And I'm like, here are my leaders, here are the people, here are the ones, like, what does succession plan look like when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it? So like, if I'm giving our listeners an immediate action plan, what's the first thing they go and do?
Yeah, so I would say the very first thing that people should go and do is understand the current landscape and evaluate, right? So as we talked about, getting everybody together, having the conversation, where's the why, and making sure that everyone is aware of the current circumstances, looking at projections in the future as well. And there's some great, discussion points. This is a topic that you can research on how to have a planning session like this among leaders. But from there, it's the anticipating the retirements and turnover for key positions, which also means anticipating the unexpected. It can be a simple, sure, a spreadsheet or organizational chart of, okay, let's start at the very top. What happens if this person or this person is no longer here tomorrow? And who would be the next individual in that role? Is that something that we need to prepare for from a hiring standpoint? Is there someone internally that we can groom? Because to your point, Eric, we can't just assume that someone who is already excellent in their current role is going to be able to elevate, especially one, maybe they don't want to. Maybe some people are happy and content where they are. And two, we have to put in that time and energy to develop them properly. All of this has to be in alignment with our culture and values, and we constantly need to disrupt our way of thinking to innovate in the marketplace. So there's a lot of this is our own internal discovery as well, and understanding what our blind spots are, and having some green light, red light, right, conversations, and making sure that you can create bite-sized pieces to start to roll out right away. But that's the first go-to, is just having this conversation.
Yeah, perfect. Maybe to kind of wrap, I'd love to hear, have you worked with an organization? What I would just love to hear is like, what does this look like when it's working? Have you worked with the company who's put a succession plan in a game plan? And what are some of the feedback you've gotten? What is some of the, is there like a success story out there where you're like, hey, I work with X, Y, and Z. I'd love to hear if you've come across companies who've done this well and what the result has been.
Yes, absolutely. We've worked with a number of companies on succession planning in different ways based on what their needs are. One company that I've worked with for several years is an HVAC company. It's an ESOP in Grand Forks, and it's a family-owned business that grew very rapidly. And as their leaders were preparing for retirement, they brought us in to have a conversation around how do we develop our people to be prepared to take on these roles. And we had that initial planning discussion looking at the hard skills that are required, because those are often easier to understand, right? What are the necessities for someone to function in this capacity at every single level? And then we developed an assessment on those soft competencies. And again, soft competencies are things like communication, flexibility, influence, motivation, attitude, all of the things that bring a culture to life and are just as important to be a differentiator in the marketplace, because what makes us different is people and relationships, right? So we put these assessments in place, tailored them a bit to this company and their culture, what they were looking for, deployed them with their first emerging leader group. Then what we did is created a learning and development plan specific to what those results showed us, using all of the content and resources we have. And we rolled that out over the course of 3 years. And we did that with intention because it takes time. And we started with a certain level, moved to the next level, knowing that this plan was going to take time to execute and that the unexpected could occur at any point, right? So we worked through this process, and now they have taken ownership over it. They continue to leverage us as needed, but really our goal is to make sure it's sustainable and it's something that they can own and that they can drive forward without us.
That's awesome. Very cool story. I just keep thinking about these HR people who are listening. And one thing that we love to do on our podcast is give them one actionable takeaway that they can leave this episode with today. So what is that one thing that you would have them do to get them started?
I would ask yourself, who would take over in my position if I couldn't be there starting tomorrow or Monday? Let's say it's Monday because tomorrow's Saturday, right? If I could not show up and I wouldn't be back for a significant period of time, who would take over? And start there and then begin asking yourself the next series of questions.
That's a fun exercise.
It is.
What's your gut?
It's a scary one though, right? Like, right. It's a real tough to be like, wow, one, I don't want to go anywhere.
Right.
But two, you're absolutely right. Like, I guess if someone had to do this, who do I think the company could do this? Or if we had to hire somebody, what kind of skill sets would they want to have? I think it's a really good exercise, probably a hard one to get people to do because it's just tough to have your brain go there, but it's really good. I super appreciate your thoughts. A couple of big things that I have is, Bethany, make sure you look both ways when you're on a bus. I'm nervous that you're going to get hit by a bus, and I don't want to have that happen. So
that would be very unfortunate timing, right?
Yeah,
I can only imagine.
We would have to pull this podcast episode down if that happens. So please
do.
And also just make sure you know that everyone just take the time to understand, look within your company, understand what your skill sets are, and give an opportunity to get people to grow. So I thank you so much, Bethany. This has been really, really powerful. Great tips. I know our HR pros are going to walk away with some really smart nuggets of information they can take and apply right away. So thanks so much for your time. Be safe. And it was so great talking to you, Bethany. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to connect, and I will do my best to not get run over by a bus.
Deal. It's a great way to end an episode. Thanks. Bye. WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.